Now, back to Access Tech Live.
Now back on the show, and 5 years ago it was the Accessible Canada Act that was introduced with the goal of realising a barrier-free Canada by 2040.
Yeah, and this week, it's National Accessibility Week, Stephen, and joining us now to update us on where we stand is the CEO of Accessibility Standards Canada, Philip Rizkallah. Thank you for being here. We last caught up with you in Vienna. We're nice to have you back on the show, especially this week. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Mark and Steve.
Philip, first off, tell us about Accessibility Week and the significance it has in Canada.
So this is a National Accessibility Week. The significance is actually quite high. It brings together community groups, it brings together governments to talk about all the projects, all the initiatives that have been underway for the last year towards the goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040. The name itself, Forward Together, it says it all. I mean, here, what we're implying here is that we have to continue to move forward. The emphasis is that we have collective efforts to move forward to try to achieve a barrier-free Canada. And when we talk about together, it's everybody, whether it's community or persons with disabilities, governments, including municipal, provincial, federal, it's industry groups, it's academia, it's a general public. All these groups have a vested interest in the removal of barriers to accessibility.
Yeah, no, it's a group effort, right, Philip? But we have to all get involved and all do our part to make sure that we hit that goal. What kind of companies and work are being recognized this week?
So we're recognizing a lot of the communities. We work with a lot of the communities that represent persons with disabilities. They're being recognized for the great work they're doing. We're also working with multiple industry groups, whether it's the airline industry, the banking sector, and other groups that are committed to working with us to kind of remove barriers within their industry. And we're also working with academia. So we work with them to help us develop carry out research that will hopefully be used to remove those barriers to accessibility, or hopefully be used to create new policies for the government or help inform the development of our standards.
It's always interesting, Philip, from my point of view as a disabled person, hearing people talk about barrier-free, it sounds great, and I love it, and of course I am 100% behind this. Why wouldn't I be? But, sometimes it can feel a little bit empty, because the reality for a lot of us is we've been hearing this, I've been hearing it for 40 years of my life, that, things will improve, things will change. And it feels like we do get a very small amount of change over a long period of time. How realistic is it to say that, Canada can be barrier-free by 2040?
I think it's very realistic. The government, in introducing the Accessible Canada Act, looked at it in kind of a holistic approach. So they created our organization, which is Accessibility Standards Canada, and we're responsible for developing the standards that will hopefully be turned into legislation or help create policy. These standards are basically creating equity-based requirements. Equity in the sense that it's looking at a much broader base or a much broader group of Canadians, including persons with disabilities, and coming up with solutions for everyone. So the solutions is one piece of it, but they've also created two other entities. One of them being the Commissionaire, which is kind of the enforcement overseer of the provisions that are going to be going into legislation. And we also have an accessibility officer that goes around the country and talks to various groups, whether it's industry groups or whether it's communities of persons with disabilities, and gets a pulse for what's working and what's not working. So I think the fact that we have these three entities working together in this process, it gives me a lot of confidence that we are going to meet our target by 2040.
I mean, can you give us some examples of sort of direct change that you would expect? I mean, it's great talking about the research, and of course that's all important, and moving the needle is sometimes just enough. But, what examples can you give of real sort of practical change that could be made here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on a number of standards in areas of employment, built environment, communication, plain language, transportation, and a number of different areas, procurement. And I think if we just maybe take an example of built environment. So when I talk about built environment, it's the buildings that you enter to either go into a restaurant or go to work or to go to an event, a movie theater, to go to your event. What we're looking at is we're taking the way codes are developed today, which are based on what we call minimum acceptable standards. And we're turning that upside down. We're saying we now no longer can just design for the mass. We can no longer design for the 75th percentile of the population. We're looking to expand that so that we're actually trying to capture 95, 96+% of the population. And in doing so, coming up with solutions for that larger base of the population, we will address the needs of many people with disabilities. So a really great example would be if you have a 3-story building, current codes would not require you to have an elevator in that building. So if somebody wants to go to that building and go to the 3rd floor, whether it's for an interview or whether it's to see a doctor on the 3rd floor, they would be restricted, especially if there was somebody that had mobility challenges and were in a wheelchair, for example. What we're looking at is saying if you have a building that's 3 stories, everybody should be able to access every aspect of that building. You shouldn't be restricted from accessing all parts of that building like everyone else. So we'd be looking at solutions that would require you to have maybe elevators in that building or other provisions that allow you to reach all areas of the building. So this is a different mindset. Rather than designing for one group, you're designing for everyone.
Philip, when you started this job, you know, even if I think back 5 years, I can imagine the stories and the challenges you might have had, or even the pushback from some companies when you're trying to talk to them about this. Have we gotten past that? Are we at a point where people are now embracing the conversations and actually taking action to make this possible?
So I think there's been a definite shift in mindset over the last 5 years. From when I first started, we were trying to educate people why we're doing this. It's not a nice to do. It's a requirement. It's a human right. So I think we're beyond that. I think most groups, most large organizations, most governments, whether it's provincial, municipal, federal, and also some of the industries that fall under our legislation, they see it. They understand why we're doing this. Now, that's not to say that they're going to get it right away, because there's still a learning curve. There's still an adaptation of what we're introducing, because it does change the way you introduce, and it does change the way you create policies within your organizations. But we're seeing a real positive momentum. We have been over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm really heartened by what you're talking about, Philip, because, you know, first off, I think that there's 2 things here that need to go side by side, and you're talking about this. One, in a sense, is regulation, bringing in regulations and some kind of rules, almost a little bit of a nudge towards, you know, getting it right. We can rely as much as we want on goodwill, but we have to sometimes push where, you know, some companies, as you know, will not comply, and there's just no way around it, and it almost has to fall to legislation. But with that legislation has to come guidance. And that sounds like something you're building into this as well. It's not just about saying you must do something. It's here's what you can do.
Yeah, Steve, we're actually going a little further. We're telling you this is what you must do to address a specific obstacle or a barrier to accessibility. This is how you have to do it. And then we're giving you tools to kind of understand how to put in the features to achieve that. It's one thing just to give somebody a regulation, say, here it is, this is what we need you to build, and you need to build this in your building. The interpretation around that could be quite varied, depending on where you are and how somebody interprets that provision. So we're providing the tools, we're providing the education, we're communicating with those groups so that it is very, very clear what the intent is behind those provisions that we're creating. So it can't just happen by creating legislation. We're going to be piloting, we're going to be trialing some of these new solutions that we've created. And if we have to tweak, we'll tweak them before we come out with the actual legislation.
Philip, what about the cost? Is the government putting some money behind it to help, you know, communities? I can think of some of the smaller communities that may not have the money and the financing to be able to adapt buildings or actually make changes. Is there any commitment on that side of things?
So I'm not aware of, I mean, I'm sure there will be some commitments depending on where you are in the country. Various municipalities, various provincial governments may introduce some sort of incentive. But from our perspective, what we're creating is the solutions, and we're creating options so that you can actually determine what would it cost me to do this? What will it cost me to do this? So you can make informed decisions based on the budgets that you have. So we're going as far as we can because we don't have a program that will provide costs for somebody to upgrade their building or change their employment policies. But we will provide you enough tools so that you can make sound decisions based on where you are and the size of your organization.
And there are some countries around the world that are forcing web accessibility as well. Is that something you're looking into as part of this? You mentioned built environment, but you know, what about online? Yeah. What about access to the internet, access to apps, all that?
Absolutely, Steve. So the first standard that we're making a recommendation on is the ICT standard, Information Communication Technology Standard, which deals with WCAG. It deals with a number of the items that you just mentioned right now. So that standard, we're hoping to make a recommendation to the minister within the next few months. So it'll be the first standard coming out, and that will kind of covetail what's been happening in Europe and in the US. We've taken a standard that's referenced by several dozen countries right now. We've tailored it so that it will work in Canada, and that's a recommendation we're going to be making. So we'll be very, very consistent approach across several countries.
Philip, what can we do to make sure that the general population, the general public, is aware of everything that's going on and share that message? Obviously, conversations like this are great, but I noticed, as I mentioned earlier on in the show, I was at Vision Health conference last week, and people were demonstrating some pretty cool tech that us in this space, we knew all about it. But I realized that the audience and just the general public, if they're not tuned into it, they just don't even know some of this stuff is going on.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because there's so much going on, and there's only the community itself is being bombarded constantly. This is coming out. We'd like your input on this. We'd like to consult you on this, and there's just so much coming at them, whether it's from industry or whether it's from various levels of government, that sometimes it's overload. From our perspective, what I could recommend is that if you have a genuine interest in a specific area, whether that's communication, whether that's information communication technology, employment, that you sign up for our website, first of all, and then we can send you information of what's happening. And then you can look through that very, very quickly and decide, well, you know what, I'm not interested in this, I'm not interested in this, but I really like to know what they're doing when it comes to WCAG. I really like to know what they're doing when it comes to allowing persons with disabilities to become employed. So you can kind of focus in on those areas. Outside of that, I would say follow us, follow all the initiatives that are going on across the country. We have about 16, 17 standards under development. We don't expect everybody to be experts in following every one of those standards. We have about 85 research projects underway, but there's definitely going to be some gems in there that somebody will benefit from.
Philip, it sounds amazing. I can only imagine it feels like pushing water up a hill sometimes, but you're doing an amazing job, and we've got to start somewhere. What's the website you're talking about there? How can people find out more?
So go to Accessibility Standards Canada. Just Google that, Accessibility Standards Canada, and then you'll get into that. You'll get into our government site. It's the Center of Expertise, and it's very, very intuitive once you're in there. It's a couple clicks, and you get to just about any piece of information you want.
Love what you're doing. Good luck with it. Philip Rizkallah, the CEO at Accessibility Standards Canada, which you can search for online to find out more. Thank you for coming on, Philip.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Mark.
When we return, May is Vision Health Month, and we're going to speak to a professor and a doctor who's been exploring AI's role in vision and accessibility. Stick around, it's Access Tech Live.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.